former ESPN colleague and also the host of her own podcast on Spotify called Jemele Hill is Unbothered from The Atlantic as well. Good to see you, Jemele Hill.
Good to be here. I feel like since leaving ESPN, I've picked up 17 more jobs.
Well, that's the way it works.
It is.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is that ESPN, you had 17 jobs.
Right, but it was just under one umbrella.
Roof. I know.
Correct.
Now you're a hyphenate, right?
Yeah.
Now you're a conglomerate. You're your own brand.
Ooh, a conglomerate.
Well, you are your own brand. I mean, you're wearing your own branded material right now.
You're not the only one who has their name in the show.
You know what? That's the idea to do it. That is the idea to do. How many people still think though that you're on ESPN when they talk to you?
Still a lot, and I
Right.
especially love the people like in an airport or on a plane or on a flight who say, "Oh yeah, I watch your show all the time." I was like, "Do you?" So last thing I said, just really curious because I haven't been there since September.
I'll tell you, Jemele. I'll tell this story. I've told it before. Brockman, you've heard it about 19 million times. I feel like you're like my wife Susie. Like, oh God, here comes this story again. But when I left ESPN, the All-Star game, the NBA All-Star game was here in Staples. My wife was working for the local Fox Sports regional, and she covered the Lakers for all those years. So we went to the event, and I'm there, and she's working. I'm chilling out. Some guy comes up to me and says, "I watch your show every day." And I'd left ESPN months before, and I'm on NFL Network, which is on only in about 12 million homes thanks to DirecTV. That was it. And I said the same thing. "Oh, do you? Really? You watch NFL Network?" He goes, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "You're not on ESPN anymore?" I'm like, "No." And then the guy paused and he goes, "Are you all right?" I'm like, I could fog up a mirror for you right now if you want. But so many people, think that if you've left ESPN, it's not a good thing. But I would beg to obviously differ with something like that.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of people, understandably so, they look at ESPN as the pinnacle job in sports media. Like, that's the destination job. That's where you want to end up.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that dream. ESPN, though, was never a place that was on my vision board. I never got into this profession thinking I have to wind up on TV, I have to wind up on SportsCenter. Those are things that just evolved once I got there. The thing I always wanted to do and to be was a writer. And I spent, more than half of my career as a print reporter. And so that was my main focus. So I guess because I was never one of these people who felt like they had to be on television every day, leaving TV wasn't that hard. I mean, I'm not retired from it.
Right.
I'm just more or less very picky about what I do and thinking about it in a much different way than I did when I was there. But it was never really my dream to be a SportsCenter anchor. And in fact, it was it was the worst job that I had at ESPN.
What do you mean? Come on now.
I know. I feel so terrible saying that to somebody who was a great anchor there.
I don't. By the way, I don't take it personally at all. But the 6 o'clock that you did is a totally different show than a highlight-driven event that I was part of many moons ago at 11 o'clock or at 2 in the morning. I mean, there's so much going on, and they were also trying to reinvent the show with you at the same time.
Yeah, it was a lot going on, and people have to understand that when I stepped through the door at ESPN, it was in the commentary lane, and that was the lane that I was in. And SportsCenter, it was always an awkward fit because that is a show to tell you. I mean, it's the evening news of sports. So while there's no new highlights to show you because you're on at 6 p.m. Eastern, the fact is your job is mostly to update people on what's happening and what's about to happen in terms of that night. But there were all these conversations that were taking place in sports that I wanted to be a part of that I really couldn't in that role. And so it was never the perfect fit. And as you said, they were trying to evolve the show.
Yes.
There was a lot of creative differences in terms of what the show should be. And so while I learned a lot and certainly learned a lot about television and anchoring, because it was a fire drill every night as SportsCenter tends to be, it was the worst job I had since I was there.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So now what do you like about what you got going on?
Well, what I love, and as somebody who's been planted firmly in the podcast lane, is being able to sit down, talk to really interesting people, have great conversations, not be limited to sports, because there's a lot of other things that I'd love to talk about.
So you don't have to stick to sports.
I do not.
Right.
And so I talk about funny comments. I always think it's hilarious when people because, writing for The Atlantic, when they say, oh, why can't you just talk about sports? Perhaps you don't know the publication that I'm writing for right now.
Well, I probably think it's The Athletic.
Yes, because a lot of people did get that confused at first. But The Atlantic, I wanted to write in particular about the intersection between sports, race, culture, and gender. And they created a space for me to do that on the Spotify podcast. That's something totally different. I mean, we could talk about the Game of Thrones finale,
yes,
as well as talk about, the upcoming presidential election, sports, culture, news, politics. So it just allows me to play in many more areas.
Yeah, I mean, but we just saw a picture of you with Barkley and Stacey Abrams together. I mean, that's pretty much in one photograph what you're talking about what sort of convergence
Although what's
you can
so
talk
funny
about.
is that the people, of course, people might expect a conversation about sports with Barkley. We spent a lot of that podcast, trying to solve racism in America.
How'd it work? How'd it go?
I think we got a little work to do. We got a little work to do.
Okay.
Me and Stacey Abrams and I, what I didn't realize before this podcast and as I was doing research is she's written 9 romance novels. So we talked a lot about romance writing.
Are you serious?
Yeah, she has. She's written like thriller romance novelist under a pseudonym. And so she really has a real passion for writing, which I can obviously appreciate. So while, sure, we talked about voter suppression and how she dealt with the aftermath of not winning the gubernatorial race, but we spent a lot of it talking about writing and Game of Thrones too.
Tell me her pseudonym was Danielle Steele? Is that it? Please tell me that's what that was.
Though I hate that I can't remember what it was, but it wasn't Danielle Steele.
Okay, that'd have been something. So I was also going to ask if Stacey Abrams gave any thoughts on whether Kevin Durant has already made up his mind for free agency. If you completely swapped roles here.
With a big decision to make of her own. No, she didn't offer any thoughts on that. Barkley had some thoughts on that, as well as Magic, because at the time when we did the podcast, he had just quit. So everybody was still trying to figure out what the hell just happened.
Well, actually, do we have that? I mean, that's the only way to get into this conversation here with Jemele here, Jemele Hill here on the Rich Eisen Show is basically what Stephen A. Smith had to say when Magic was there on First Take on Monday. Interestingly enough, when the same day that Frank Vogel was being introduced as head coach. Do you have it, Jay?
What the hell happened?
Yeah, what the hell happened? Are you allowed to say something bad about Magic being Michigan State, or being critical, not bad about him?
Well, is anybody? I mean, now, especially now that I live in LA, it's like double pressure, right? I don't know. I think sometimes the way you leave a job says everything about how you felt about your time at that job. Okay. And the way that he left indicated to me that there was a lot of issues. I was shocked that he left in that regard, given what we think we know about his relationship with Jeannie Buss.
Well, what he says
is their relationship. Right. But that's the kind of way you leave somebody after a bitter breakup, after somebody cheated. Okay. That's how he left that job. Betrayal. And
that's the word
as he indicated on First Take, it was the backbiting. I think the fact that he felt as if his authority was never was always undermined, and that he never really had the authority that he had, that he was able to leave.
But he didn't say that at that press conference.
Right.
That was going down as you were interviewing Barkley on your pod.
Yeah.
He didn't say that. He said the reason why he didn't fire Luke Walton and the reason why he's leaving is he's not that guy. He's the Magic who wants to just call up Dwayne Wade and say congratulations, or tweet at Russell Westbrook. That's the guy he wanted to be. He didn't say, I don't have the power here and I want to be the president of the Lakers and I have no ability to do this. I brought that up to C-Web yesterday, and C-Web goes, he made it look like, instead of it being two completely different points of view, an evolution of somebody who couldn't speak his mind on the day that he left, to able to gather his thoughts, hearing what people were saying about him, and show up on First Take either at the worst possible time for the Lakers, or sure enough, the same day where Frank Vogel is named and Rob Pelinka is the one trying to turn the page publicly for the team.
So we're in a trust tree. We're in a nest here, right?
We are in a nest, yes.
So I'm sure that the thoughts that I had right after I left ESPN versus what I would say now are different. Still the same story. And this is not to say that I have a bunch of bad things to say about ESPN.
Correct.
But it is to say, like how I just told you about how SportsCenter was the worst job that I had there. I didn't say that 8 or 9 months ago. but I just said it now. And so I'm saying,
True.
I'm saying all this to say, and this is not to absolve Magic. Do I think he should have left in a better way? Absolutely. Especially if you have the relationship that you say that you have. Now, maybe they caught him at the wrong moment in the sense that he was ticked off about everything happening. He was still trying to put a bit of a happy face on it and trying to do some spin control so that he didn't make or didn't throw all of the organization under the bus. But he alluded to then that there was some backstabbing that was happening.
Yes, he did
just
say that.
did not say who it was.
And we just all assumed. Now, the only difference, though, between your analogy and the Magic one, other than the Michigan State stuff, is you didn't profess and still don't profess to have a sibling type relationship with Bob Iger.
No, and nor have we ever had one.
I don't believe so.
No,
but
we haven't.
that's the thing that I don't understand is, okay, you want the best for Jeannie Buss. You keep saying that. Ramona Shelburne, your former colleague at ESPN, reports that Jeannie asked Magic not once but twice, off camera, obviously, privately, what do I need to know? And Magic both times essentially said, no, we're good. You don't need to know anything. And then shows up and tells Stephen A. Smith something that he wouldn't tell her?
So,
I mean, that's...
also another relationship I analyze and which shapes my perspective is looking at some of the other beefs, if you will, that Magic has had. Look at the one with him and Isaiah and how complicated that was.
Oh, gosh, yes.
For years, they told two completely different stories about what happened and who said what. And Isaiah, this was years ago, even told me at a Super Bowl. We were at a Super Bowl party that he was just as shocked when Magic let it be known that there was still existing beef, because he had talked about how recently, or he told me recently, he had seen Magic and that everything was fine. And then he, I think it might have been around the time that the book that he did with Bird came out, and he was stunned that some of that information was in the book. So I don't know if this is just, Magic, when your nickname is Magic and you're known for being happy and smiling and always being the guy bringing folks together, if that makes it harder for you sometimes when there's conflict to tell people how you really feel, because to some degree you're worried about your persona. And that's not to call Magic fake or anything like that, but I'm not surprised that if it's a little bit more complicated for him in his position.
Jemele Hill here on the Rich Eisen Show. What do you think about Kawhi Leonard in Toronto, what we saw last night, what we've seen from the Warriors minus Kevin Durant? Do you think either one of these guys has the notion that they're going to be staying put come July 1st?
I do. I mean, if you're Kawhi Leonard, I don't know how the city, the organization, the success has not made an impression on you. People are treating this like it's some foregone conclusion. The city of Toronto, I think, very much fits his personality. I mean, and I think right now what we're seeing from him, we always knew Kawhi was a great defender, a high effort player, but I think we've been exposed to just how much heart he has. And that's, again, not to say that he didn't show any in San Antonio, but because this truly is 100% his team.
Yep. We're
seeing emotion from him and things from him I don't think that we've seen before. And I don't know. I think it goes, a lot of people always said when he was coming in that, like, there's no way that he would stay. But again, like, I think they've shown him a lot. Like, unless he just wants to be in LA or wants to be in another city or, wants to play for a specific organization, I think the lull is there. Kevin Durant, I would be stunned if he's in the Golden State uniform next year.
No kidding.
I would be stunned. It just feels, just in his energy and comments he said, and I know he hasn't said a whole lot, and even in some of the little mini arguments and mini dramas that have played out with that team all season, it just feels like he's ready to move on.
All right, let me get into this with you a little bit here, because I've said the exact opposite. And I'm not the type, as you know, to sit in a chair like this, and I'm going to take the exact opposite position.
You're not being contrarian. I know.
Well, right, so I can get a click or people saying, "Did you hear what that guy said?" So it comes down to July 1st. You're sitting in a room. You're Kevin Durant. And you see the Knicks, and I love Fizdale. I think that's their ace in the hole, as far as I'm concerned. Certainly with what the owner and how I feel about the owner and the rest of the management team there. Their pitch to him is, come to New York. You can own New York. We're going to see if we can get Kyrie. We're going to draft R.J. Barrett. We got a lot of young guys. You walk into the door in Los Angeles at the Clippers, and you see Steve Ballmer, and he's nuts, but you know he's all in. Doc Rivers is one of the best in the business. He's a Coach of the Year finalist right now. And then there's the guy who's on the logo, who is the one who told him, go to Golden State. And Jerry West can say, see how I kind of get you, KD? And then he goes to Golden State. And then there's Steve Kerr, there's Curry, right? There's the Hamptons five back together again saying, let's run it back.
Yeah.
And they're sitting in this beautiful, not in the Hamptons this time, but in this beautiful jewel that Wilbon said he visited a couple weeks ago.
The new arena, yeah.
Saying it's the most amazing thing on planet Earth.
You're like, it's an easy decision,
well,
right?
Well, that's what I'm saying. When it all comes down to it, and rubber meets July 1st road, that's why I don't get the whole, like, he's got to find his own thing.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with not just that desire to kind of create something on his own. It seems like him and LeBron are destined to have mirror ways their career has gone. How things played out for him in Oklahoma City was how things played out for LeBron the first time he was in Cleveland. Then he went to Miami to figure out how to win. KD is in Golden State figuring out how to win, what it means to be a championship, to get that monkey, that albatross off of him that he hadn't won.
Okay.
Now he's got multiple championships. Next step is proving to people with all that he's learned in these last couple stops that he can do it on a team that's built around him, his personality. He doesn't have to share anything. I think the negativity that he experienced in when he went to Golden State, I still think that's a factor. It bothers him. And because it bothers him so much that he started a burner account and went through all those things, that lets me know that he is ready to move on, because he'll never really get the credit that he deserves. Now, he shouldn't care about what people say on social media, but that's easier said than done when you're getting waves of it all the time, where people are doubting whether or not you can do this on your own and considering you a front runner because you went and joined another team that had already won 72 games and all that other nonsense. To me, he made the right decision. I would love to see him stay because I like greatness and I want to see how many titles can this core group of players win. But at the same time, I think KD is also thinking about, am I better off being away from this organization and cementing myself further as a historic player?
Well, Jemele Hill here on the Rich Eisen Show. Let me just take this one step further, since you mentioned Game of Thrones before. Maybe Kevin Durant is seeing what you're talking about, mirroring LeBron's career, and is about to try and break the wheel.
Ooh.
Because if I'm him, I'm looking.
Good.
Hey, now, right? See,
good.
He's trying to break the wheel because, with all due respect to LeBron, the situation he's in right now, where he went in his last or his third act in a way after learning how to win and winning, is showing up to a Tiffany brand name of a sports organization with a front office that has nothing but dumpster fire being talked about it. And just because you roll out the red carpet and say, hey, we're the Lakers, that doesn't bring somebody there. That sounds like the Knicks to me. Mm-hmm. That sounds like if Durant goes to
New York. So your brand
York,
you're right now, you're basically trying to...
Well, yes.
But you would tell them after the fact, because that's what brand does.
Jemele, I do have the best story.
That is true.
Well, as I'd like to say so myself. That's what, to me, again, when it all comes down to it, it's going to be an amazing July 1st for the NBA. Amazing. I think Durant stays put. Maybe Kawhi does, and Kyrie's looking, where do I go? And maybe he winds up here, runs it back with LeBron. And I think the Lakers would go.
Oh, that would be incredible.
For it right now.
That would be an incredible full circle story.
The Knicks wouldn't like it, but I think that's the way July 1st seems to me. Kawhi comes to the Clippers.
Another great option for him. But I again, like you, to me, it seems like a very, I wouldn't say easy decision, but it just seems like the Golden State still has the best case. I think he should worry less about the people who feel as if he cheated the system and got the cheat code by going to Golden State. Who cares about those people? As I've often said, is, we've become so much a championship or bust society. You can't blame players for chasing rings when that's all people seem to value. So he really put himself in the best basketball situation. And how many times, I hope he thinks about this. this. How many times are you going to play with a cast that's that great and so selfless? You know, Steph Curry is probably one of the most selfless superstars
We were talking about
ever.
the most unassuming, selfless superstar, period.
Yeah.
Name me another.
He has no problem, him or Clay or Draymond, any of them have no problem admitting and professing that Kevin Durant is their best player, despite all they've done and won together. That's a unique situation.
And the coach, too.
Yeah. It's a very unique situation. And
why would you leave it?
While the circumstances are much different, but even though it was torture for me as a Pistons fan, but when the Bulls, they just broke up for nothing.
Right.
And this would feel like, so you're just breaking up for what? And I mean, not that Golden State couldn't win, without him. They still have a lot of major pieces in place, but especially if they get to this finals, I mean, they are in the finals, sorry, but if he isn't able to play in the finals and they still win, I mean, I think that's another reason why that pushes him out the door.
It does change the narrative. I agree on that. Okay, so check you out in The Atlantic for the written word and the spoken word on the podcast. Jemele Hill is Unbothered on Spotify. And then on Twitter and Instagram at Jemele Hill.
Very simple.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks
really
for having me,
Rich. Stick around one more television-only segment if you don't mind. I got one thing I want to ask you about. That's Jemele Hill here on The Rich Eisen Show.
For more of The Rich Eisen Show, tune to Audience Channel 239 on DirecTV for free on BR Live or download the Rich Eisen Show app.